And the reality was the only way Leyton Orient could survive would be if he was gone.
It was just very difficult to try and have a rational negotiation with Mr. Becchetti.
The money just got out of control. The level of waste was just obscene.
We were 24 hours away from losing the training ground. We didn't have a credit card. I don't think we had any paper in the photocopy. We couldn't buy a stamp.
I think they had completely lost control of the football club.
To this day, I find it really strange the way he went about it. It was so mismanaged. It was so not calculated. It was sometimes like Championship manager.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very final episode of the Circus Upstairs.
I'm James Masters, a rather sad feeling Orient supporter, but not because Orient aren't winning. They're absolutely on fire at the moment. It's just I can't believe this is the last episode.
What are you going to do with your time now that you don't have to record episodes of this podcast anymore?
Well, Matt, we just calculated it's taken us the best part of nearly 4 years. I just want to point out that in those 4 years, by the time those 4 years are up, I would have hopefully have had 2 children.
I fear that listeners may not consider that the 14 episodes are worthy of 4 years worth of effort.
No one's paying us for this, man.
What?
But I've really enjoyed this. It's been brilliant.
I've hated every second of it.
Do you think Mr. Becchetti's listened to an episode?
Yeah, I bet he loves it. Like, it's a story all about him.
That is true. Anyway.
Well, for the very last time, can you recap where we're up to in the story?
So, Orient temporarily avoided liquidation in court after Becchetti promised to pay his taxes. But soon afterwards, it emerged that players and staff did not receive their wages from Art, with the majority of the remaining senior players refusing to play. Omar Rizza, the 11th manager of Becchetti's regime, was forced to select the youth team who, despite battling defiantly, were unable to prevent Orient's relegation out of the Football League for the first time in their history.
So Orient are due back in court on the 12th of June, where, if the promise to pay the taxes doesn't materialise, the club could again be liquidated. Meanwhile, after CEO Alessandro Angileri made it clear that Becchetti was open to offers for the club, there have been lots of discussions going on behind the scenes. Now, actually, discussion about a takeover had been going on since at least November of this season and had been involving Matt Porter and Nigel Travis, who eventually led the consortium that took over the club. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about Nigel Travis?
So Nigel Travis is a lifelong Orient supporter. But at this point in the story, he's living in America, in Boston, I think, and he's very involved with Dunkin' Donuts and Papa John's Pizza. Matt, do you eat either of those?
I can't say I do, to be honest, which now makes me feel very disloyal to the man who saved our club. We should note that a Papa John's delivery bike turns up at half-time every match at Brisbane Road and delivers a pizza to some lucky fans who are in, what do we call that? The special dugout?
I'm not sure special dugout has a particularly nice ring to it.
It's the creme de la creme of the corporate fan experience at Brisbane Road, which means you watch the game from a little dugout near the corner flag and get delivered a pizza at half time.
I've never been tempted to do that, but you might have just sold it to me.
The curious thing about that is, even though it's probably the most expensive ticket in the ground, because the scoreboard, such as it is, many years Orient fans lobbied for that scoreboard, is above the dugout, so the only people in the ground who can't see it.
We got a bit distracted there. So Nigel Travis had been very successful in his career, made some good money, and he was the guy who was going to lead the consortium to try and wrestle the club back for the fans and away from Becchetti.
That is correct. So here is Matt Porter himself. So Matt, who we've spoke to a lot through the course of this podcast. Matt was the former chief executive of Orient before Becchetti took over, but he'd been doing some conversations behind the scenes. Here's what he said.
So I'd always been in touch with, or stayed in contact with Nigel, and he'd stayed very, very loyal to the club, probably more so than I did, in so much as he was still sponsoring it. And Nigel would do a lot of the sponsorship out of his own money, even though if it was his company's brands he was putting up there. And he also had at the time, when I left, the league was getting its act together on streaming, and there was the ability to live stream matches to directors if they were overseas. And Nigel was directors and sort of key sponsors, and Nigel was able to watch the matches through streaming from America. So he'd stayed in touch, and we used to email each other, and I'd keep him updated on the bits that I heard from staff who were still working there. And I was telling people there, don't give up, keep up hope. We'll get through this. I'll find somebody. Blah blah blah. And Nigel always used the line to me. He didn't want to own Leyton Orient, but he would save Leyton Orient if he needed to. And something happened. I don't know. Maybe we would drop to the bottom of the table, or another manager left, or something like that. Because by the end, it sort of got to the point of anybody who was left could have a go as manager, and that's no disrespect to the guys who had a go. It just so happened that they were the ones who were left, and it was just a case of how many games could they last before it became too physically difficult. I think poor Danny Webb. It was very difficult. Him, Andy Edwards, Kevin Nugent, Hendo, Andy Hessenthaler, all these guys. They've gone in there to do an honest job to the best of their ability, and hopefully do well enough to further their own careers either at Leyton Orient or elsewhere. And it just, there was too many obstacles up for them. But no, we got to the point, something happened, and I sent Nigel an email saying, I think now's the time. And he came back and said, okay, let's see where we can go. And I got him an introduction, because I didn't want my name associated with it, because I knew Becchetti didn't like me, and I'd been quite vocal in a couple of media interviews, and so I thought it's probably best if I'm not involved publicly, because I don't want him to go against Nigel's ambitions. So we managed to get the introduction, and then Nigel sort of led on that front, and I think he had a couple of visits to the famous house in Mayfair and stuff like that. So that was November, and we'd hoped to get the deal done by the end of the January transfer window. And I think if we'd have done that, we'd have saved our Football League status, which again wouldn't have been particularly difficult. I think Andy Edwards was manager at the time, and it wouldn't have been too much of a challenge to finish the season with a senior team rather than all the kids who got thrown in at the deep end, and unfortunately we got relegated.
So the conversations continued between Matt and Nigel. By March, Loft, so the Leyton Orient Fans Trust, had also got involved. Here's Tom, who's the co-chair of Loft, with a bit more explanation around that.
By this point, some of the contacts we'd had, a contact with Nigel Travis had sort of been very quietly established. And he intimated that he was getting a consortium together. But obviously he wanted to get a sense from fans about what was going on, and how to approach dealing with someone like Becchetti. So, given how much Becchetti hated Orient fans by this point, there's no way that we could let any of this get out, because it's a horrible situation to be in when you're a fans organisation, you believe in transparency and all the rest of it, having to keep a couple of things a little bit back. But we sort of had to a little bit. But even so, even though we knew that Travis was there was no guarantee at all that he was going to get a deal over the line, because Becchetti was so difficult to deal with. And he was prone to sort of changing his mind, having little tantrums, and basically not being very cooperative at all, and trying to play off other interested parties against each other, and demanding something. I don't know why. We're not quite sure what he got in the end, but demanding stupid amounts of money for a club that was about to go down to the National League. It was quite stressful, thinking that there is a possibility of salvation there, but it's still a long way off, and you didn't really feel any confidence in the existing owner to actually play fair, or it felt like the world was against us still at that point.
Did you know all this was going on? I suspect you did know, James, being a hard-nosed investigative journalist.
Yeah, I'd heard about what was going on, but I'd been told in no uncertain terms not to say anything.
Told by who?
I'm not going to tell you who.
What? It's the last episode. Just say whatever you like now.
My mum. Yeah, she was very worried that it wouldn't go through, so she told me not to say anything. I think, like Tom said, at that point, everyone was kind of on tenterhooks. They didn't want anything to go wrong whatsoever, and if we had to keep quiet about something for the greater good, then so be it. But of course, I think Tom mentioned that it wasn't just Nigel looking at Orient. There were other parties interested as well.
That is correct. And it emerged that another party who was looking at Leyton Orient was a man by the name of Alan Bowers. What do we know about Alan Bowers?
Well, we know that Alan Bowers was a former West Ham and Norwich player.
Boo!
Well, exactly. He was supposedly, according to the Daily Mirror,
I was doing West Ham there, by the way, not Norwich. I've got nothing against Norwich.
I'm glad you cleared that up. Thanks. Anyway, according to the Daily Mirror, which did a big story at the time on Bowers, Bowers was leading a consortium of East London businessmen. He'd made a £4 million offer, and he was hoping that would be accepted, or he could walk away, the Mirror said at that point.
So let's have a listen to Tom Davies' perspective on what was going on with Alan Bowers.
He had made some contacts, but he seemed like a bit of a chancer, to be honest, in terms of he seemed to just mouthed off about his interest, not really giving much detail about what he had and what his money, what much sort of funds he had and how he was going to run the club. Sort of palled up to sort of random Orient fans on Twitter and tried to sort of puff them up. But it wasn't really, it didn't really seem serious at the start, really. He was connected to, he had some football connections. I think it was Home Church or something like that, but not a particularly impressive one. So my instinct at that point was, obviously we'll give him a hearing, he wants to talk to us, and talk to anyone, but he didn't seem to be that serious. It sort of came and went quite quickly as well, all that. It's just like, we just don't need stuff like this at that point. I mean, you always get a few people like vultures circle around stripping clubs.
So Alan Bowers' next move was quite a curious one. He allegedly elected to send a text message to 7 specially selected Leyton Orient fans. Were you one of those people?
I was not, Matt. Would you believe it? I was not. And I was a bit upset about it because I felt at that point I'd done a lot for the club in terms of my reporting.
I was also not one of, I should say they were dubbed the Magnificent Seven. So I was not one of the Magnificent Seven. I was equally distressed by that. I was like, I've spent so much time writing blogs. I wrote a fucking book about the club. I still didn't get to be one of the Magnificent Seven. Gutted. We are clearly not bitter about the fact we weren't selected to be in the Magnificent Seven. But nevertheless, we're going to now mercilessly take the piss of everyone who was. So I assumed that Bowers had an accent from the West Ham supporting part of Essex. Didn't bother to check, but got our friend and host of the Lowdown podcast, Adam Parks, to voice it for us. So here's that text message that went to the Magnificent Seven, not me and James.
Dear friends and true LOFC supporters, if you received this, then you are one of our Magnificent Seven who are handpicked by our team to carry the message to the thousands of genuine fans that care and love for Leyton Orient FC. You will now know that our offer has fallen on somewhat challenged ears, and for the love of the club and a great majority of fans, it's time to step out of the ring and hopefully someone will rescue the club and stop just talking about it. We only wanted what was best for you and the club. However, some individuals felt we were elongating the process. Not true. The process was broken. Stop the moaning, whining and negative behaviour. The club needs all the help it can get in these times. God bless you all, the boys of Beaumont.
What is your take on that?
He's trying to G up the fans to get behind whoever takes over the club.
He's trying to G up 7 fans.
Well, the 7 fans, yeah. He's trying to G up the Magnificent Seven. I don't think there's ever a real chance he was going to buy the club. I'm not sure it was genuine.
I haven't got a clue what the fuck he is on about.
I mean, he could become chief executive then, couldn't he?
On what planet do you choose to send a text message like that to 7 specially selected fans as part of your strategy to take over a club?
Did he actually write this message? Did Alan Bowers ever really exist? Did he really want to buy it? Who knows?
We should have got one of the Magnificent Seven onto this podcast. Steve McQueen, Yul Brynner. So, moving on from the Magnificent Seven and Alan Bowers, more importantly, Orient were due back in court, and this is obviously very serious because on the 12th of June, so just a reminder, in March, the case was adjourned. Becchetti had promised to pay all the taxes that he had outstanding. The Orient were due back in court on the 12th of June to see if he had actually done that or not. There was still the same imminent danger that Orient could have been liquidated on that day and not exist anymore. A couple of episodes ago, we spoke to Bobby Friedman, who was the lawyer barrister representing Dave, a lifelong Orient fan, gave all his time for free. Here's what he said about that second day in court.
At the second hearing, he did pay and had paid the bills. I was looking around the courtroom because HMRC had been paid, and I was looking around waiting to see if there was another creditor ready to pop up saying, no, I'm owed another £100,000. And I was actually really hoping that there was someone, but there wasn't. So that kind of brought the insolvency aspect of it to an end. And that was actually kind of bad news, funnily enough. It was good news because the club wasn't going to be wound up. And I can see why everyone would think, oh, that's good that he paid off the bills. But the trouble was he wasn't funding the club properly. It wasn't like there was going to be a long-term solution. And the reality was the only way Leyton Orient could survive would be if he was gone. So what we lost at that second hearing was that bit of control because he paid everyone off. And so if there are no creditors and he's just sort of paying bills as they come in, then there wasn't a way to put the club into administration to wrest control from him. It meant the only way the club would be got back from him was if he agreed a sale. I actually felt pretty helpless because there was no real sign of what was going next. And it meant that we were purely back in Becchetti's hands. So it was that hearing was almost a bit anticlimactic, but it was, in retrospect, the beginning of the end. And the good news was, and it did then open the way, although I didn't know that at the time, it then opened the way to the club to be sold. And fortunately, that was pretty much the only sensible thing that Becchetti did in the entire time he was at the club.
There were about 50 or 60 Orient fans there that day. Tom Davies was one of them. Here was his perspective on that day in court.
Yeah, it was a sort of bit of a damp squib as well, really, because that was, is that it? It emerged that he paid a whole lot of debts off at the last minute, which again was one of those slightly mixed feelings responses we felt afterwards, because it meant that we lost some of our leverage again and he was suddenly in theory, in complete control. So at that point, it's like, right, it's back to a game of sort of a hardball between him and Nigel Travis and any other possible suitors for the club. We were kind of, as unsure as ever in some respects, even though there was a sense that we could be quite near the end game. It was a bit of a disempowering thing because we had to kind of, rethink again about how we got the guy out.
So it felt a bit like we're in this weird state of limbo then.
Yeah, and deal was progressing, and there was hope and there was optimism, but because of who we were dealing with, kind of just waiting for things to happen. And is he actually going to sell the club? Is he going to go through with it?
So negotiations were continuing, and as we've said, it wasn't Nigel Travis alone. He was leading a consortium. Could you give us a bit of an insight into who was in that consortium?
Yeah, so this wasn't just Travis, as you've said. The consortium, Eagle Investments, also included Kent T.
Yeah!
Oh, I was waiting for you to do that.
Very nice guy. I interviewed him just after they took over the club, and I gave him lots of dilemmas between Texan things and Cockney things. Chaz and Dave or Beyonce? Fried chicken steak or jelly balls?
You're asking the wrong person because I'm a vegetarian, but...
Oh, yeah. Don't answer that. Oh, what is fried chicken steak? Is it chicken or is it steak?
I don't know, but I wouldn't go near an eel. That terrifies me.
I don't want to go to...
I've never been. Maybe Kent, if he's listening to this podcast, will take us one day.
He's totally listening, man. He laps up everything Orient-wise. Howdy, Ken.
That accent was worse than my Italian accent. That's all I'm going to say.
That's a fair point. One of the other guys involved in the consortium was Marshall Taylor, investor, management consultant. He's still a director and shareholder. He was involved directly in the negotiations with Francesco Becchetti himself. So we very happily talked to Marshall, and we're very curious what it was like in the eye of the hurricane, negotiating directly with Francesco Becchetti.
You game plan everything. So, when you're going into a meeting, before that, we would game plan everything. So, this could be the outcome, this, and this. We'd have countless scenarios in our head that we've worked through and would know how to deal with that. And then suddenly, just something that none of us would ever have game planned before happened. And it's just, you almost laugh at certain times because, a period of time and a meeting or two should go this way and it goes completely the opposite. There are a number of instances where meetings were just for no reason stopped and people walked out. It was bizarre, and I can remember speaking to somebody who was working with us on the negotiations, and they were, I won't give you their name, but they were really well known within football, having worked on numerous administrations and have worked with numerous owners of a similar kind of ilk. And they turned around to us at the end and was like, this is the worst we've ever seen. And, that's coming from someone with 15 years of experience of dealing with these type of things countless times. And it was just very difficult to try and have a rational negotiation with Mr. Becchetti. He liked to shout. I got shouted at down the phone a number of times, threatened that I would get sued. I wasn't sure sometimes whether I had my phone on speakerphone or not. It was that loud. He had a very interesting manner to deal with people. How he spoke to people. I felt I was in no way intimidated by any of that, but it seemed that he definitely had a manner that I'd never come across before with anybody else. I think we were dealing with a character where I believe that, there was just no rational reason to a lot of things that was taking place. And it's very, very difficult to try and negotiate or see any foresight for someone when they are that way and they behave that way.
I imagine negotiating with Becchetti is very similar to trying to persuade a spoilt 3-year-old who's somehow got their hands on a massive box of chocolates that they can't eat them all.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And as someone who regularly interacts with, not a spoilt 3-year-old, it's my son, as someone who regularly interacts with a 3-year-old and trying to get him dressed every morning, it's almost impossible at the moment. He just runs around the room. I can't get near him. And I imagine it was a bit like that with Becchetti. And maybe he was clothed at the time. I'm guessing he was anyway.
So despite all of those difficulties, behind the scenes, things were inching towards a deal. Here's Matt Porter again on what was happening.
We got to the point where the negotiations went well, and then they went badly, then they went well, then they went badly. And we kind of always believed we were the only serious runner. There was never seemed to be anybody else who had there was enough evidence to suggest that they were about to do a deal. But we took a view that if we weren't able to get it done by the end of June, we wouldn't proceed because it would have basically been a write-off for the following season as well. Unfortunately, we just managed to get it over the line.
So on the 22nd of June, 2017, an official announcement was made on the club website and the Leyton Orient Twitter feed that the club had officially been sold to the consortium led by Nigel Travis. How did you feel when you found that out, James?
Just relief, I think. Relief more than anything that it had happened, because we knew it had been close. We knew that it had been a bit touch and go because of Becchetti and the person that he is. But once it had been confirmed, I was just delighted, absolutely delighted. Relieved because at one stage it looked like we were going to lose our football club. Happy because I knew Nigel Travis was someone who was Orient through and through. We were desperate to get rid of Becchetti, and I think we would have welcomed nearly anybody. I knew obviously Matt Porter was involved. Matt is someone that we have huge respect for, and has Orient at heart. I just felt like the right people were going to be involved, and that although the past few years have been extremely painful, what was going to come was going to be really, really exciting.
When I read the announcement, I ran around my room singing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, There were Munchkins, Julie Andrews, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion.
Were you wearing those famous red slippers? Were you clicking your heels 3 times?
I think I pushed the Wizard of Oz analogy too far there, didn't I? None of that happened, but I was very, very, very elated.
I think elated is a good word.
Yeah, it just felt like a massive, massive relief that he'd gone.
Yeah. I was happy, but I was so tired by that point. And it just really wanted to go and enjoy my summer at that point.
Let's hear from Tom Davies on how he felt when he heard the announcement.
It's basically the most I've celebrated since we beat Peterborough in the 2014 semi-finals in the playoffs. Actually, I was at work, so I couldn't run around and go and get a skin for Win Supports Club or anything. But, it was that kind of feeling, it happened, we were free. And there's a great sense of vindication for all of us, really, or the whole fan base, that when you sort of rally to save the club, it's worth doing it. It's always worth fighting for your club. And you will get, and I think if you look at how the club's developed since then, I mean, actually it's put our gates up. This actually was not, denigrated. Protesting and mobilising was not, against the interests of the club. It actually galvanised people. And Kent Teague actually said that when he first came on the board. He said that he'd been impressed by the demo at Blackpool away and the passion shown on that occasion, that it made him think that it was worth investing in. So there's in all sorts of different ways that season was good for us all, even though it kind of drove us mad and gave us lots of sleepless nights and stuff. But it was worth it, But it was a lot of pain at the time and a lot of stress at the time for all of us.
Yeah, I remember feeling very excited about the National League season that was about to come. Obviously devastated when we got relegated, but I was so happy that Becchetti had lost the club. I was excited about what was going to come next.
Who hasn't wanted to go to Boreham Wood on a Saturday afternoon? Who hasn't wanted to go to Bromley and get beaten 6-1? These are all the things that were going to await us.
The challenge ahead for the new owners was that the club had obviously been left in a catastrophic state of disrepair. And I think we barely even realised how bad things had got. And the person, one of the people tasked with trying to clear up that mess from day one was Marshall Taylor. So he was appointed as the interim CEO. And we spoke to him about those very first days of going into the club.
So I remember in the car on the way there, and I was like, what am I going to find? We knew that everybody was about to close the club down, whether it was the electricity company, the mobile phone. Everyone was either pulling the plug or going for county court judgments. I genuinely thought, I wasn't sure whether I'd go into the building, there'd be no electricity, whether there'd be any lights on at all. And I think you also have to remember is, when we did get through that door, there was hardly any staff left. There were, very, very small, loyal numbers left. The club almost, couldn't function. I can remember going to see Colin, in his room, and he didn't even have any money for petrol to put in the lawnmowers to cut the grass. I had to take cash out of a pocket for him to go down and get some petrol. There was literally there was not a bean left within the business.
And here's Matt Porter on those first days after the takeover.
It was a disaster. And actually, do you know what? Marshall's the person really who deserves a lot of the credit here. I mean, the hours that he spent ploughing through reams and reams of unpaid bills and disastrous record keeping. We were 24 hours away from losing the training ground. We didn't have a credit card. I don't think we had any paper in the photocopier. We couldn't buy a stamp. It was just a skeleton, really. I don't think people had really been paid that much. That frequently on time. There was nobody left under contract on the playing and coaching side. It was a shell.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I knew it was bad, but I don't think I realised how bad it was until we started talking to Marshall and Matt for this series.
So let's go back to Marshall, who told us about what he needed to do to at least try and make sense of all this mess.
My first job, I think, was to call round every single county court in the UK. And I think there was 55 of them or something around that number. And basically say, hello, I'm calling on behalf of Leighton Orient. Can you let me know if anyone has any county court judgments in process in regard to our business? So that took me a whole day to basically find out who was taking us to court or who was about to try and wind the business up and to cease that operation. And I pretty much had my own bank card next to me, and I would speak to people and I would pay them off to stop a county court judgment or to stop any legal action. So that's really was day 1 and 2. I then had to start ringing round suppliers saying, do we owe you any money? You know, it was after we'd got through the courts and we'd called everybody from a legal point of view. We then had to call all the suppliers, and can you imagine how embarrassing that is? You know, we're the new owners of Leighton Orient Football Club. Can you tell us, do we owe you any money? That's pretty much what we had to do with every single historic business that the football club had ever dealt with.
So you have to wonder how things had got so bad and how the finances of the club had been so badly mismanaged. The more Marshall delved into it, the more he began to get an insight into how that had happened. Here he is again.
This is the worst I've ever seen it or ever seen. And also it's not just that, it's the lack of any basic business now. So another good example was, we had Vodafone about to take us to court for a £7,000 phone bill. And I looked it up, spoke to them over the phone, and that £7,500 phone bill for 1 month of mobile phone usage. When I looked at the bill, one of the ex-management team monthly phone bill was £3,700. And when I went back through their last 12, 18 months worth of phone bills, on average, it was between, £2,500 and £6,000 a month. And when I looked through it, it was just beggars belief. If you'd have taken 10 minutes to call up Vodafone, you could have gotten all inclusive minutes, all inclusive data, all inclusive foreign calls for about £150 a month at the time. And they just didn't do that, couldn't be bothered to do that, didn't do it. And they were just racking up massive bills. And it is really, it comes down to having, every penny that any of my businesses spend, there is a return on investment on. We are cautious with everything we spend, and there was just a real lack of any appreciation for, the company. And I saw that. That's just one example. Saw countless things where, money was just bleeding out of the club and being wasted day in, day out. There were 25 phones that we were paying for that were being used by nobody. I had to call each number just to see if anyone would pick up. We're like, who are these numbers? And this was just going on and on for years. And the same thing with properties. I'd suddenly see this, whether it's council tax demand or electricity bill. And I'm like, where's this flat? What's this flat? And there were 2, 3, 4 properties, possibly even more, that the club were paying for. And it seemed that if you were in management, you got a flat or a house, and it was absolutely silly money. I think one of the most expensive properties was £10,000-12,000 a month. So all of those were being paid for at the club by the time.
It just makes you really angry, doesn't it, when you know that there are employees at the club who are not being paid and they're spending £10,000-12,000 on property for people in management positions.
And just the stupidity of it. Like, why let your mobile phone bill run up to £7,000 a month?
the club had almost become a plaything by this point, hadn't it? And it was clear that there was going to be no success on the pitch, and so it was milk for everything off the pitch, and that's why it came so close to passing.
I hate to say this, but it gets worse. Here's Marshall again.
We had a really expensive BMW X5 on lease that was the old CEO's company car. And at the time, my wife partner had exactly the same car. And I was there the day we went and bought it, so I was very aware of the options list. And I went to go and pick up the car from Alexandria at the time, and I couldn't believe I think he must have gone through the options list and ticked every single box. The stereo system alone was a £7,500 option. And, it was, when I say fully loaded, it must have had everything in it. And it's just, we're talking of a League Two club, and the monthly bill was astonishing. Again, it just, smacks to me of just, spending money like it's going out of fashion, or spending other people's money like it's going out of fashion.
He talked earlier about every single one of his businesses, every penny they spend having a return on investment. What do you think the return on investment of Alessandro Angioleri's BMW X5 was?
£7,000 stereo, Marshall said there, didn't he? 7,000.
What music do you think Alessandro was listening to on that?
Beach Boys. Definitely Beach Boys.
Where did that come from? Why the Beach Boys?
I've got no idea. I've got no idea. First thing that popped into my head. But we've had the phones, we've had the properties, we've got the BMW. There's a picture being painted here, isn't there? And it's not a particularly nice one.
I mean, the juxtaposition of the fact that people like Philip Otham, the stadium announcer, club photographer Simon O'Connor, kit man Ada Martin weren't being paid, along with all the other stuff and the players. And yet Alessandro Angioleri, hapless CEO, was cruising by in his BMW X5 with every single feature that you could possibly have, blaring the Beach Boys, don't know why, out of his stereo at them. It just feels like they were laughing in our faces.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And it's quite vindictive, really, I think.
Our friend Dave Victor, BBC journalist and the voice of Leyton Orient, was even more furious about this than us. Here's his take.
The money just got out of control, didn't it? The level of waste was just obscene. And there were some horrible stories about sort of tickler sandwiches that would have to arrive from sort of the other side of town for particular people, and incredible expense. It was just waste, wanton waste, and I just found it horrible to watch. And you're used to bad games and you're used to bad results, but I'm not used to being embarrassed and ashamed by the club.
The other thing is, we've talked a bit about how Becchetti had surrounded himself by yes men. No one would say no to him, so he got to make any crazy decisions that he wanted to. Of course, they're going to say yes to him if he's paying for their flat and paying for their top-of-the-range vehicles.
Well, absolutely. If someone was going to pay for my apartment or my house to the tune of $12,000 a month, I would be unlikely to contradict or question the person who was paying for that.
You'd sell out all your principles, is what you're saying.
I would absolutely. I've got some other principles, Matt, if you'd like to see those.
How much do they cost?
Oh, that's the next bracket up, and that's the Alessandro bracket. I'm not sure you could afford that. But no, you're right. He surrounded himself with yes men. If he's paying for everything, then you're going to agree with him. There's going to be no dissent in the camp whatsoever.
Here's Marshall again on some of the chaos that he was dealing with.
Everything just looked chaotic. How the business was run seemed chaotic. General things seemed chaotic. And, Mr. Bechetti's obviously got a lot of things going on. That could have been something to do with it. He has, at the time, lots of other things that he was working on. But it just seemed really chaotic. And, just some of the things that had happened were just, let's put it this way, I don't think it's possible, it would have been possible to spend any more money. And it was the same thing when it comes to kind of contracts. There were a number of contracts, whether it's to do with, the ticketing system or the or the brewery or whatever. They just weren't good contracts for the club. We had to pay a lot of money in some cases to get out of those contracts because they just were negotiated really badly. So not only was money being wasted hand over fist, also from a commercial point of view of contractual obligations, what was there and what the club had to me and to the rest of the group were really poor deals. We went and renegotiated those and got much better terms for everything. It seemed from top to bottom. I think anyone could have come in and spent less money. It was I think it was eye watering. I'd spend days there and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to find next? I think they had completely lost control of the football club. They'd lost control of the finances, weren't aware. They did try and give us a spreadsheet of who they believed the club owed money to. It was wholly inaccurate. I just feel that they had completely lost control. I think it's poor management. It was. I think there was no level of detail to any kind of activity. Everything was done in a certain way, rushed through. That was my view. And then clearly the fans had turned hostile and they knew that they weren't welcome, and that made things difficult for them. It made them, not able to come on site possibly. But I don't think that they were ever really trying to put the club out of business. I do believe he wanted the club to continue. He talked time and time again about the history of the club. I do think he used that as a negotiating tactic to try and obviously get as much as he could from us as a consortium. And possibly, if what had happened to Macclesfield had happened to Orient, he would have walked away and not thought a second thought about it. But I don't really think it was ever his intention for the club to go out of business. A lot of fans, read the forum, and you see social media around that time, and they were saying, "Is he doing this on purpose? Is he trying to put the club out of business?" I just think that the whole team there were out of their depth. They didn't know who they owed money to or what it related to. It was absolute chaos.
Listening to Marshall there and knowing just how bad things were, I think it's a complete eye-opener. Utterly incredible, really. I think he gives a rather fair, or kind assessment, perhaps, to Becchetti and his team in terms of saying that he did want the club to survive. I would look at it perhaps now and say, well, the club was more valuable to Becchetti alive than dead, and so if he was going to recoup some money, it was in his interest.
I think we'll never know for certain whether he was deliberately trying to sink the club or not. Maybe he didn't even know. I think your take on it is a good one, that he probably would have done that if it hadn't been financially damaging to him personally. I certainly think he had the spite in him, and I think he probably enjoyed the fact that he'd put Orient fans who didn't end up loving him through such a torrid time.
I just don't think he ever thought it would end up like this. I'm pretty sure when he bought the club, he envisaged a scenario whereby he would put money into the club, he'd get the best players, the fans would love him, we'd be brilliant, West Ham would be running scared, and he'd become something like a hero almost to us. We'd worship him because he was giving us the money and the football that we wanted. But I imagine the way he felt was, I've put lots of money into this club, why won't they love me? And I don't think he ever really got past that.
I think he still doesn't understand why it wasn't a success. I think we heard in a couple of interviews, he asked Dean Cox, why isn't this working? I think he thought it was as simple as, if I put the money in, then we can buy success. It just shows how inept he was. as a businessman to not recognise that the money alone wasn't enough, that you have to run a club properly. And just the arrogance behind that, to think that he could come and run a business in a sector that he had no experience of, and not to take advice from people who know about running a football club, and just to make decisions off the top of his own head with, as we've said, everyone around him who's just going to say yes to him. Like, of course it's going to be a complete disaster. Let's listen to some other final. We're nearly at the end, James. I can see you flagging.
I could do another 4 series, Matt. Don't know what you're talking about.
We're going to listen to some final takes on Becchetti himself and his motivations from some of the people we've met along the way in this series. First up, here's Tom Davies of the Leyton Orient Fans Trust.
I think he was like a spoiled kid. He was a spoiled nephew of a rich family who made money, had their fingers in various pies around, particularly in Italy and Albania. Probably there might have been a sense that there was money to be spent and even made in English football, because that's, London, also London property and all that kind of stuff. He had his Mayfair pad. So I think he probably thought it was a nice toy. And it's like, if you looked at the way his behaviour, it's like real sort of, bullying, sort of machismo over everything he did really from day one. He didn't get on with people, pushed them around, His motivation by the end, it felt like spite, to be honest. Just felt like these people haven't, he thought he might get worshipped, and, but even you got the odd high five from fans when we had that brief winning run at the start of 2015-16. But other than that, he didn't get the, the worship. And I think he probably felt like, how dare these people defy me? But it was like dealing with a spoiled kid, really, which is probably doing a disservice to spoiled kids.
Next, we asked Dave Victor and posed a question that was certainly on my mind. Is Francesco Becchetti a psychopath?
I don't think he's a psychopath. I think he's ignorant and arrogant, and I think he probably inherited wealth. I don't think he's ever been very successful in his own right. Trying to look at sort of other ventures he'd been involved in. None of them seemed to be particularly successful. But I thought he was an arrogant man, and he was an ignorant man, and he didn't know what he didn't know, and he didn't care enough. I think he thought it was easy. I think he saw football as glamorous. I think he saw TV as glamorous. But what he didn't see was all the hard work that you have to be successful, both in football and in media. And it's not just about hard work. You have to have some talent. You have to have some passion. You have to have some vision. And he had none of those things. I think he didn't ever quite occur to him how difficult it all was. He had no idea of what it was he'd taken over and what Leyton Orient was. He embraced me several times, which was not an experience that I wanted or welcomed or enjoyed, and it still makes me cringe thinking about it. I thought he was quite insecure. I thought he surrounded himself by people that wouldn't challenge him. He didn't strike me as a warm person. He struck me as quite a shallow man. I felt, I know it's a strange thing to say, I probably felt a bit sorry for him. Because I think the word pathetic probably actually sums him up very well.
I don't disagree with any of that, except maybe the bit where he said he felt sorry for him. I don't think I feel sorry for him. He's right that he was pathetic.
I just thought Dave summed it up beautifully. I think we can probably finish here, Matt, to be honest.
Well, we can't, because I've got more quotes. I know you're keen to get this over now, aren't you? Have you got something pressing to do tonight?
I hate long goodbyes, and I'm really worried I'm going to get really upset by the end of this podcast.
Well, we are drawing this out like the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. There's hours to go.
Excellent. Good. I do like the Lord of the Rings, so don't get me started.
Next, Dean Cox, Orient legend on the pitch, forced out of the club by Becchetti in the most cruel and spiteful way. His final perspective on this crazy period that he was a part of.
To this day, I find it really strange the way he went about it. It was so mismanaged. It was so not calculated. It was sometimes like Championship Manager. It felt like we were just a bit of a joke.
I like that. It was like Championship Manager. Not like Championship Manager when I played it and tried to get Leyton Orient promoted to the Premier League, which did not have much success for me. And unfortunately, I got addicted to the game to the point where I can say this now because I don't work for this business anymore. I faked a meeting during the middle of the day that I had to travel to go home and play it for an extra hour. Bad, isn't it? I still didn't get Orient to the Premier League.
Sorry, let's just go back here. You faked a meeting so you could go home from work and play Championship Manager.
Yeah, I did do that. And I realized after that point that maybe my addiction was not good, and decided from that point I'd never play a video game ever again. And I haven't.
I just want to clarify one thing here. When you went home to play Championship Manager, did you remain in your work clothes, or did you then put on a suit to play Championship Manager?
No, I didn't put on I was a tracksuit type of manager. I shouldn't have revealed. I feel bad that I've revealed that now. But all I can say is, if anyone from my professional sphere is listening, that was a very long time ago when I was very young, and I would obviously not do anything like that again. Anyway, to sum up this entire tumultuous period, let's go back one more time to Dave Victor, who, quite frankly, is much more articulate than you or I, James.
The values of the people that came in were just so different to those values that last from one generation to the next, and it's those values that equal Leyton Orient. And this was a nasty episode in our history, and it's one that we need to learn from, and it's one that I think you're right, other people need to learn from as well, because, we talk about these being football clubs, but they're businesses, and, if they do fall into the wrong hands, things that are important, values of family, friendship, just disappear so quickly. And it's not about money. I mean, one of the joys of what we saw was the supporters coming together. But also, if anybody dares to say to me now, football's all about money, I can say to them, I can promise you, football is about so much more than money.
I like what Dave said about it's so much more important than the money. And I think all the way through this whole period, it certainly reminded me, I'm sure other fans, how much Leyton Orient means to me personally, and having the fear that was going to be taken away, and to have it so badly mismanaged, and for so many awful things to happen to so many people connected with the club during that period. It was really, really, really bad. And I'm glad we have come out the back of that, and it makes me love Orient a little bit more to have gone through that and cherish what we have.
It scares me a little bit that I love Orient even more now, because pre-Becchetti taking over, I didn't think I had any more space in my heart for Orient. It's been my obsession since I was 5 or 6 years old. And it's been one of those constants in my life. It's always been there. And I've always found that very helpful. I always thought that even when I was at school, I knew that Orient, if Orient were at home on Tuesday night and then at home Saturday, that week was going to go quickly. I knew I was going to spend more time with my grandpa because I was going to go to the game with him. I knew I was going to see people that I was excited to see. And, I've grown up going to Orient with the same people since I was 5 or 6. I'm turning 40 in a few months' time. And that journey has been full of ups and downs, but I don't think I ever expected anything like those few years under Becchetti, where, quite frankly, I was ready to walk away from the thing that I loved more than anything, outside of my family, obviously, in case they're listening. But no, really, I love more than anything. And I just felt as if those few years were kind of stolen from me because it was just so horrific. I just completely fell out of love with it all. And then to sit here now and having done this series with you, Matt, seeing where we are at the moment in the league, back in League One, going to Orient and watching good football, being delighted to see us where we are, but even more grateful because of where we have been. And I would always say you should never take any of this for granted. Enjoy this period because it's not always going to be like this. There are going to be difficult times. You never know when they're just around the corner. And so when you get the opportunity to really enjoy watching Orient, to celebrate, these are good times. And I think I'm even more appreciative of that because of what we went through under Becchetti.
What I loved was that post the takeover, everyone was so grateful that we still had a club and had all of the love for the club that you said. And yet we lost our first game in the National League 2-0 to Sutton United. And there was the usual implosion on Twitter, a complete meltdown, everyone slagging off the team. And I felt, yes, that is the Orient I know and love.
We're back. We're back.
I think that's it. I mean, what else is left? I mean, we should probably thank anyone who actually is still listening, if there is anyone. Ken Teague, maybe?
I think we should absolutely thank the people who contributed to this series, because they didn't have to tell their stories. Really blown away by the number of people who came forward that wanted to talk to us, who wanted to share their stories and let us know what really went on during those years. It was absolutely fantastic.
I think we've dragged it out long enough now, haven't we?
I think we have. I haven't learned any more Italian. My accent hasn't improved.
I think you still need to give us one more.
I will do it. I will do it. I will do it.
And wave. You've got
to
wave
as well. But hopefully we never have to do a sequel.
I hope so. On that note, thank you everyone and goodbye.
Arrivederci.
That was your best wave, epic.